We had one man that was, I guess he was invited. I guess the whole event was really centered around him and his comments. But Jerome Powell went up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the anticipation was that he was going to say, "Hey, things are much better. We're not going to increase interest rates as much as everybody expects." And then in 10 short minutes, he changed the tenor of that entire conference, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. People probably knew this last week. Jerome Powell was speaking as the Fed chair, and yeah, 10 minutes, and he made some, I think, strong comments of saying, we're kind of laser focused on this. You call it price stability,
Right.
which is really bringing down inflation. Not wanting inflation to keep going and going and going. We want price stability. We want inflation to be stable, whether it's a stable 4%, a stable 2%. I think they want to bring it down to that 2% level. But he wants it stable, and he basically was saying, we are laser focused, we are resilient, we're going to make this happen, and that spooked everybody.
Yeah, and his comment, price stability, this comes right out of the speech. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. In other words, he's taking a strong personal responsibility for lowering inflation back down to that 2%. And it serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. And he made an inclusive statement. I'm sure that he picked over every single word in that speech, because the world is focused on what that man says when it comes to Americans' economy, because it affects everybody in the world ultimately, right?
Right. Yeah, all of us. And it's hard to understate how much his words matter. We've been talking a fair amount about inflation and what it means, and looking back at past chairs and future chairs. He has a hard job ahead of him, and it's not getting easier.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about is the two things that are kind of cutting against. Go ahead.
So no, I think from a standpoint of historical references, I think that Jerome Powell, everybody's comparing him to previous chairmen, going back particularly in the 70s to Arthur Burns and all the Federal Reserve chairmen since then. And I think on his shoulders right now, as he said, I've seen what's happened in the past. I don't want to have that happen on my watch. And I think he's really stepping forward and saying very boldly, this is my job and we're going to get it done. And we're not going to let up on what our job is until we get inflation down to about 2%. Even if that means pain to individuals and their households and businesses. He was very clear in his comments, wasn't he?
Yeah, the Fed has to be kind of the adult in the room in this moment, and do the hard thing and make the hard choice. And I think he was very clear saying we're going to do this. And the 70s is a really good example. We've been talking about and reading about that stuff as it relates to today. And Arthur Burns, who's the chairman from 1970 to 1978. And one of the things that happened in the 70s is they increased. So in the 70s, at this point, they were having 11% inflation, higher than we have today.
Substantial. Again, just to be clear, our inflation right now is less than 5%. So 11% would be substantially higher than what we're experiencing right now.
Yes, kind of extreme. And so they had 11% inflation, and unemployment was about 5%. And they said, this is too high. So he increased rates. He increased the interest rates to 12%, kind of kicked them way up. And with that, unemployment went from 5% to 9%. People were feeling the pain. Inflation was coming down. Things looked good. But when that unemployment spiked up, everyone started screaming. And they said, great, we've done it. We've accomplished it. Hooray. And they cut the interest rates down to 6%. And that pushed us into the next level of inflation for the end of the 70s. We had extreme inflation again. And looking back, Arthur Burns has made a few comments of saying, we missed it. Like we should have kept the pace. We should have kept where we were at for much longer. And I think Jerome Powell is hearing that. He's understanding that. And we already have Elizabeth Warren and others kind of saying, hey, this is too much. This is too much. We can't take it. But I think those cries are going to get worse. I think they're going to get louder. And I think Jerome Powell, to be the adult in the room, is going to have to persist in what he's doing to really make sure we don't have this double dip inflation issue, but really deal with it. And from his speech, he seems resolved to do it, even if it's going to be longer than politicians and people want it to be.
So you're listening to Randy Barkley and Jeremiah Lee. We are with Tricord Advisors. I'm a certified financial planner, and Jeremiah is also a certified financial planner, but he's also an attorney. And we are with our firm is a registered investment advisory firm, and we are talking about inflation today. We're talking about basically the contents of what Jerome Powell talked about and the volatility within the marketplace and the impact of that going forward. And I think we need to talk about two key components, and that is labor. I think we need to flesh that out. And then also fiscal. What's going on in Congress? What's going on with the executive branch to kind of counter what the Federal Reserve is trying to do? The labor right now, we have very low unemployment. So, Jerome Powell is not really too concerned about driving unemployment any lower. In fact, we're probably at the lowest ebb for this particular economic cycle. Yeah. But he's very concerned about inflation, and he made about his clearest statement. I don't think anybody could confuse his comments and his words and saying, I don't quite understand what he's saying. I think he was very clear.
Yeah, he's laser focused, and I think just as you said, he didn't care about the labor market at the moment, saying they're fine. It's not out of control. We are going to just push on inflation. And if unemployment goes up, I think he's fine with that. I don't know how high he'll let it go, but a ways. I think he's taking his dual mandate, inflation and unemployment at the moment, saying unemployment's fine. We're focused on inflation. And I think, and part of that is, COVID still. We're still having some COVID issues. There's still a number of people who are out of the marketplace, either because they have long COVID or they've decided not to come back, or they're remote work only. So we're still dealing with that, and we will for a while.
And again, if you look at the labor, and I'm kind of reading from comments right now that 16 million working age people still have what they refer to as long COVID. And if we take out of that, 2 million to 4 million are out of work. So that adds to a labor shortage. That's why when you drive around town and you see all the help wanted signs, and you see that businesses are screaming for good laborers to come in. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that people just haven't come back to work yet.
Yeah.
But with all the fiscal stimulus that we've received, there's a high demand for product and services, and this is what's building into this. This kind of adds into this inflationary.
Yeah, that's that second piece is the fiscal policy. I mean, the Fed is trying to slow things down, keep people, from they're increasing interest rates so people don't buy as much, so they don't borrow as much. But at the same time, you have the fiscal policy, the government spending, that is still trying to push money. I mean, we just had the stimulus plan that didn't get through, but there was a big push to try and get that through. But then the debt forgiveness, and that's basically putting money in people's hands to spend. And it's hard for the Fed, of trying to deal with a really too tight of labor, and also there's money being pumped by the government into the system when the Fed is trying to slow it down. So it's a difficult balance. I think the hard part is it's not just that the government and the Fed are not coordinating. I think they just disagree. I think the Fed's taking the long-term adult choice to say we need to make this better for everyone over the long term. And I think the fiscal is saying, hey, we got our moment in Congress, we got our moment in the presidency. We need to make life better for people. Let's do these things that will make life better and give them more money so it's less painful. That's working against what the Fed is trying to do in the long term. And it's a difficult moment for the Fed.
Yeah, last month, Jerome Powell was before the Senate, and Elizabeth Warren, she went after him. And she said, you're going after inflation, but what you're going to do is cause higher unemployment. And her comments to him was that I would rather have higher inflation and lower unemployment. And Jerome Powell was, in that particular setting, all he can do is listen to what she has to say. But I think his resolve, based upon the speech at Jackson Hole, is that we may have higher unemployment because the employment is kind of dislocated. The people that are going to work, but now companies are starting to, particularly the high tech companies, we're starting to see layoffs. And so the question is how quickly will those people reattach to another company? And so instead of being unemployment up, we just came out with the JOLTS report. The job creation is massive, isn't it?
Yeah. The JOLTS is the job openings. And so it's kind of saying how many businesses are looking for workers, how many open spots are there. And it's a huge number. I don't have it written down on what it was, but it's one of the highest.
It's over 11. Yeah, it's a huge number.
Yeah. And it's one of the highest we've ever had to say that people are still hiring. And to your comment, it's not just that people are leaving companies. That happened, throughout COVID. But I think we've got to a point where fewer people are leaving and retiring and migrating. It's more so that businesses are moving forward. They're taking that next step, and they're creating jobs. They're creating positions and having a hard time getting people to fill that. And there's that natural turnaround, like you said. People get laid off from one company, they get a job with another. That's a natural, normal flow. But it's becoming a point where people aren't getting laid off in the levels they have in the past, and they're not getting rehired in levels. So they have these jobs are just open. They're just waiting for people to fill them.
Yeah, we just had a conversation yesterday with our CPA, and his comment was he hired eight? Was it 8 interns? He took us through kind of the process, right? 8 interns, and of the 8, 4 actually showed up after they were hired. And he said interns aren't voluntary work. You pay these people to come in and work.
Yeah.
And they were trying to set up in their firm so they needed people that were trained and ready to go as soon as they stepped into tax season.
Yep.
So they hired 8, 4 showed up, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it came. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it came all the way down to it. It ended up being 2. Like there was 4 initially that rolled off, and then 4, and then finally when the rubber hit the road and they started into tax season, they had 2 of those people on board. And it was incredibly frustrating. At that point, it's too late to hire folks. All the intern pool of new graduates, they've all found places, and so they really struggled through this last tax season of expecting to have 8 additional hands on board, and down to 2 is what they ended up with. And that's not a hugely unique story. We've had a number of other clients and folks who talk about having a hard time finding folks and getting them in here.
I mean, what makes this a unique time is the fact that you have this low unemployment, because typically when you talk about recession, and next week we'll probably be talking about recession and the signals of recession, but this particular inflationary moment, you don't normally have unemployment driving lower numbers. There's not more job openings when you're heading into a weakening economy. Mm-hmm. Right now, we have signs that our economy is extremely strong, and businesses are continuing to hire and can't find the people to fill the jobs that they have available to them. And I mean, it's this. And again, I think that I'm sure that's what Jerome Powell is trying to work with, and the governors are saying we got different economics, we got different circumstances, and I think you have to go back to what happened with COVID. COVID, when that occurred, it dislocated things. Everything kind of just went sideways for a while. I don't know. And we had different outcomes right now.
Yeah. Welcome back. We've been talking about the Fed's recent conversation. Jerome Powell spoke for 10 minutes and made a massive change in the markets, and he kind of showed his resolve. And one of the things we wanted to bring into this conversation also is just the autonomy of the Fed, and not just our Federal Reserve Bank, but all the central banks around the world. There's this idea to say that the Fed is politically neutral, that it's independent, that it has its own autonomy, and that it's supposed to make these great decisions. And essentially in the last, 2 major, the Great Depression and 2008, they've made adjustments to the Fed's mandates after things like this. They say, well, we want you to be independent, but we also want you to do this. And so
the political implication is that, the Fed is supposed to be apolitical, right? They're supposed to be appointed, but they're not supposed to have a political allegiance to one side or the other. They're supposed to make clear decisions based upon what's best for the economy. But we all know in the small rooms, right? And he goes before committees, and these people get hammered for their decisions. Yeah. I'm sure it's a tough role for even the best of minds.
Yeah, and I mean, they're going to be a scapegoat regardless. Good, bad, or ugly, someone's going to blame them and say, no, our policies, whatever side of the aisle they're on, our policies were great, and that Fed chairman, they messed it up. That's going to happen regardless. And then on the flip side, what we're hearing right now is saying it's too much. Elizabeth Warren's kind of leading that charge at the moment, but say it's too much. It's too much. We can't take it. We need you to change unemployment. We need you to change these other things. And the Fed has to stand up to that. And it's not just ours. Like I said, it's the whole world. So there's a lot of central banks who have a similar 2% target to say, we want 2% inflation. That's healthy for an economy. But in these moments, they're having to make hard choices, academically hard choices, as well as the personal toll hard choices. And there's a lot of noise in there, and a lot of that noise I feel comes from our own senators and congressmen and women, as well as the president. They're getting these voices saying, no, you have to do this, and it's a tough role. And
I mean, the fiscal discipline and the coordination between monetary policy that the Federal Reserve is overseeing and the fiscal discipline that Congress should be coordinating with the Fed, they seem to be pulling apart.
Yeah.
And particularly Biden came out with this forgiveness of school debt, $20,000, and it's going to add more fuel to the fire of inflation. It seems to be contrary to what the Fed is trying to do. And yet, obviously, Biden didn't call up and talk to Jerome Powell and say, I'm thinking about this. What do you think?
Yeah.
But what he's doing is answering to that far left side, the more progressive side, like as Elizabeth Warren. No, we need to forgive more debt. We need to put more money into what is perceived as the underserved, whatever that means. I'm not sure exactly what that all entails, but it adds more fuel to the fire, and inflation is probably going to be harder to tame if, in fact, that gets passed.
Yeah.
Again, in November, we're going to see potentially a change in the political outcome. So I don't know. The jury's still out on that one.
Yeah. Well, it's tough. I think when the members of Congress get into Congress, they feel that they need to spend funds on their priorities.
Right.
And that is not the same view and perspective that the Fed has. They have a mandate to make sure we keep things down. And if those two are coordinated, man, wouldn't that be great? Politically, across the aisle, if we were coordinated, between the Fed and Congress, if we were coordinated, I mean, our country, I think, would be rocket fuel. We could do all sorts of great things, but we have such a divided Congress, but also divided amongst all of Congress and the Fed of what they're trying to do, that it puts us all in this difficult situation of they're pumping in stimulus in the way of debt forgiveness, coupled with trying to bring down this inflation. It's a hard part to give more money to people to spend, as well as telling people don't spend money. Like right. That's the hard balance that we find ourselves in. And we'll see, but there's, I think, some concern that once we get through this, if Jerome Powell makes hard choices and makes us, sustain high interest rates, say for the next 3 years, and, kind of gets into the next group of senators and congressmen past the next election, I could see them making some major changes to say, hey, we don't like that Fed guy. We want easier stuff on our people.
Yeah.
And changing his autonomy or changing his mandates.
And again, the constituencies that have elected congressmen and senators, they want to be able to answer those people, say, it's not my fault, it's their fault. I'm really fighting for you, but these people are not doing what I'm asking them to do or what I hope that they would do. And so they're always looking for a scapegoat. And unfortunately, the Federal Reserve is easy. You talk about a big target. They're an easy target for somebody to say it's their fault, not our fault.
If you missed any part of this conversation and want to hear more of it, you can check it out online on our website at retirementunlimited.com. Also on YouTube, you can hear our full conversation. If you have any topics you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can leave it in the comments section below, or you can give our office a call. It's 951-684-7011.